So when I would ask for feedback, people will start talking about things around that this is not happening well, but not about me in general. And it's not that they don't want to say, it's not that they're afraid of it. They have not even thought in that dimension that, okay, that there's that I can also give feedback to. Like this is this godly feeling or authoritative feeling in India, and it comes from the way our school system works and stuff, that your superior is the right person and whatever he says and does is right, and you just have to follow. So there's no opportunity to ever give feedback back to your parents or your teachers, in some cases your bosses. So that becomes extremely hard. The way I try to drive it now is by asking setting specific time, and now because I've asked it so many times, people come prepared now that I'm going to ask this question, so what can they say? But otherwise, I think it's like any one-on-one setting is.
That was Harshil Mathur, the co-founder and CEO of Razorpay.
Like what we've seen is that success is most closely associated with how much belief the person has. And it's, it doesn't matter whether you're joining at a CXO level or you're joining at an executive level. The ones who have flourished or enjoyed working here the most and have like stayed here over many, many years are the believers. The ones who believe in the idea of the fact that, there's a brand made by Indians for Indian women, or excited about brand building, product, or just believe in the, trust us as founders, Kaushik and I. And what happened in the last 2-3 years is that suddenly there was this hype around startups, and a lot of people who are doing well in their careers started thinking of this as a alternative career option. And I feel that, often that attracts the wrong kind of people, because if you're not a believer, when the party is over, when the lights are out and there is probably no increments possible and you're going through
you're going to be the first ones to check out.
You're going to be the first ones to check out. So it's of course unfortunate for the entrepreneur, but forget us. For that employee, they will never be able to unlock that value that they thought they would create, because for that value, compounding has to play out. And for compounding, tenure matters. So you end up coming in and then you leave when, it gets tougher. You never create the wealth that you thought you could create in a startup, right? So I feel that it's like, double whammy. One is that like believers will not end up doing well. Non-believers will not end up doing well for themselves, and then non-believers don't end up doing well for us. So which is why we're very excited about the fact that we want to continue attracting those who are excited about the space, excited about.
That was Vineeta Singh, the co-founder and CEO of Sugar Cosmetics.
But the day I finished my 3 years, I was ready to run to do something different. Sequoia had funded us on the first round. I went to Sequoia to raise money. This was the days when Kunal had raised his round, Jiten has raised his round. I was ready to raise a decent round in those time and get going. And Shailendra, who's on the board of Sequoia, calls me up and says, "Hey, Amrish, there's another way to do it." And we spent hours together to understand what is the another way. But I think the simple thing what he told me is, he's saying, you're the dog who's chasing for something important. I'm going to give you the keys of the car. You drive that car. To be fair with him, he's lived up to his side of the deal till date. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm never going to call myself the founder of Pine Labs, but I'll always say that this is a company which I completely own and run.
That was Amrish Rao, the CEO of Pine Labs.
Last year, everybody was investing everywhere. The number of deals were sky high. Where are those good companies? This year, there are even better companies who are surviving in the environment, but nobody wants to touch because others are not touching. So it is a herd mentality. And we went to South Korea, some unknown investor, some single guy in Japan, HNI. So for the first 5 years, we just survived. And then when, of course, the network effect starts hitting, then General Atlantic, entire global came. So my learning from this is that, hey, you can't fight it. You just need to survive. So we think that we are like a cockroach company. We just want to survive. And while we had 18 crore when we raised, whenever me, Akhil and Saurabh, whenever we used to travel overseas, we will always stay in one room with extra bed in which Akhil had to sleep. And we, in our HSR office, which we took, even in that 1 or 2 month of summer which is there, we never took AC. while we had money, because we were so much paranoid that nobody is funding us. So what will happen to us? And I think that frugal mentality still continues. So any problem and the frugal mentality quickly kicks in because, yeah.
That was Amit Agarwal, the co-founder and CEO of NoBroker.
It goes back to the start, why you ended up starting Ather. We wanted to build an energy company. If we just landed up on batteries, and that took us to vehicles. Now, what we wanted to do was just build a lot of electric vehicles because that has a meaningful impact in the energy space. But how do you build a lot of EVs? How do you sell a lot of EVs? And as we went through our options, we kind of realized that, yeah, you could do like an ultra cheap vehicle and try and sell it, but you will just end up commoditizing your cells, not create enough value, not create enough trust, and in the process possibly cause a lot of mess. And that's what kind of happened in China. You could take an approach of go ultra heavy on marketing, right, of a fairly mediocre product. But then you're just going to run into essentially a marketing battle with companies that are way better than you on this, right? Like a Bajaj will beat you left, right, and center if you try to do that. You could try and just discount again an average product and sell that, but then you're on a discounting war with larger funded startups, and there will always be better funded startup than you. And that's a terrible thing. Like if I want to do this for the next 30, 40 years. I don't want to put the fate of this entire thing down to who fundraises better. That's a terrible, I don't like the control that it gives me. So what's a best strategy to control and actually put out a lot of vehicles? We realize that, you know what? Turns out in the scooter space, not a lot of people are trying to build a good product. With the exception of the original Honda Activa, I have very little respect for great products. There have just not been enough great products in this space. Activa was the last great product.
And that was Tarun Mehta, the co-founder and CEO of Ather Energy. Hello and welcome back to First Principles. Back after a much-needed vacation, I'm Rohan Dharmakumar, your host. If you started listening to First Principles in 2023, then today's special episode might be something you'll love. We went back to guests 6 through 10 from 2022 and created a supercut episode that highlights some of the most interesting bits from my conversations with these accomplished founders. If you find them interesting, scroll back in your podcast player to our earlier episodes and listen to the full episodes. If you've already listened to episodes 6 through 10, you can safely skip today's episode. We begin with Harshil Mathur, the co-founder and CEO of Razorpay. Originally a payment gateway to help small Indian startups handle online payments and subscriptions, but today a fintech giant offering loans, payroll services, and even bank accounts. Harshil talks about his journey into entrepreneurship, how Razorpay develops products, the importance of deliberately driving company culture, and much more. Let's hear Harshil.
Yeah, it's hard to answer. I really can't put my finger on it. I think I didn't have a computer at home, and when I was growing up.
That's my question.
Yeah. So in 4th, 5th standard, my dad put me in a computer class near my home, and it was a very simple class around MS-DOS and Word and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed that. I used to love going there, and it was I went there for summers and I loved it so much. I started going there every day after summers as well. And my dad saw that I had a lot of interest in it. So he kept the course on, and I learned DOS. I learned basic programming. I was in, I think, 5th standard or something. And I started learning like basic tools around computers and stuff. It was nothing complex, just very simple stuff. Of course, I liked gaming on computers. So I used to spend a lot of time after classes in playing games with folks there. My proper interest in computers happened in, I think, 7th standard. when because I used to love computers so much, my dad gave me a challenge that if you win the scholarship in seventh, in my school, anyone who got the highest marks across all sections would get a scholarship. So if you win a scholarship, I'll buy you a computer. So I typically used to be second or third. That year I worked really hard. I got 99%, and my dad had to buy me a computer because I won the scholarship. And that started me. Then I got full interest in computer because I had a computer at home. So I used to spend all my days and nights just playing games or writing stuff or learning coding. Internet came much later, around 10th standard or something. But used to spend a lot of time on the computer. So then me and Shashank started building the product. We were still in our jobs, but we started building the product on the side. So again, using our weekends to build the product. The most complex aspect was that while we were building the product, we still didn't have access to bank APIs and bank integrations. So the way, and this is interesting, that almost all payment integrations before Razorpay looked exactly the same, and Razorpay was very different. And the reason for that is typically how payment gateways start is that you go to a bank, you get access to their integration kit, and then people build a layer on top of it. So almost all payment gateways looked similar because all banking APIs look similar.
Built on top of something which is given to you by the bank.
So the bank APIs look similar, and you build a layer on top of it, so everything looks similar. Because we didn't have access to bank APIs, in some ways it was a blessing that we didn't know how the backend looks like, but we knew what the merchant needs. So we built it with the view of, if I was a startup and if I wanted to integrate a payment gateway, how should it look like? How should the API look like? How should the integration look like? What would I want to do? And that's how we built the first version of the product. Parallelly, I started talking to banks and trying to figure out, can we get in? So we still hadn't left our jobs because we didn't know that we can get through this banking side problem. It seemed like a very complex black box because none of us had any idea on how this side of the world works. So I literally just walked into the SDFC branch next door to my home in Jaipur and said, hey, I want to start a payment gateway. And the guy looked at me and confusingly, and he said, do you want a payment gateway? I said, no, I want to start a payment gateway. And he had no idea, like, how can you start a payment gateway? I mean, of course, we later realized that these things are handled by specialized branches in only specific cities. So I spoke to that guy. He said, no, I can't help you, but I'll try to find and call back. I went to Axis, I went to ICICI, I went to SBI, almost every bank. And some of them connected me to some people. Some of them said no directly. So it was a lot of struggle. And I spent almost 6 months just running through banks and jumping through these hoops to figure out how do you get there. And if we got rejected at one place, we try to find somebody senior on LinkedIn and reach out to him. And then we got rejected there. So we found somebody else senior in some other bank. And we were speaking to so many banks at that point of time. Remember the date, it was 6th of Feb 2014. We got a meeting with a senior guy in HDFC Bank. And while this guy was senior, he was relatively younger in banking world. And he understood what we meant by startups and by digital companies and what we wanted to do. So he was the first guy who in the meeting, he said, okay, I can give you an in-principle approval. You'll still have to fulfill a lot of responsibilities and submit a security deposit and everything, but I can give you an in-principle approval for you to start operating. I remember that date because the next day I went to Schlumberger and left my job, like literally, because that was the only thing we were waiting for. The product we were already building up, everything else was getting set up the right way. But
was it still just the two of you?
It's still just the two of us. So I left my job, moved into this full-time, told Shashank that you should also leave your job, come down. Now we have a bank integration. We know how to build the product. We have talked to customers. We have all the aspects right. We can jump into this full-time. So Shashank he still took about 3 months to leave his job and come down. He was waiting for his Microsoft shares to vest. And then he came down to Jaipur and we started building this from Jaipur in my parents' home. I think in the early days, there are two major motivations, right? Like, one is to really create a name for ourselves, like just be able to create that, okay, we built something that stands out in the ecosystem and that's used by people. And the second, in some ways, was that create something that gives us, I'll say in some ways, purpose, that gives us purpose, that like, okay, this is something that I can put my energies and whatever I have and the skills I have in the right form, right? I think over time, of course, the first part has gone away. The purpose part still stays true. The first part has gone away and it has changed to more of an impact question, that like, how big of an impact can I create now with this opportunity that I have. So whenever I look back at every day at the ecosystem, I see so many problems that are unsolved that Razorpay could solve, right? So many challenges that a founder faces, that a startup owner faces, that Razorpay could solve, that they are still struggling through. And I think now it has become more on how much impact can Razorpay have on all of these people, and can really change the way this ecosystem operates.
If we were to dissect Razorpay's success on the basis of either the philosophies or principles that it stands for, what would be the top 2 or 3 principles that has enabled Razorpay to get to where it is today?
I think the first thing I would say is a very, very strong focus on culture.
I'm going to ask you to explain that, because if you're saying this is the first reason you mentioned, and I've heard this as well from a lot of other people, that the employee culture at Razorpay is really good. What is it that you did, or what is it that you set out to do? Was that something that you accidentally ended up doing? Was it something that you deliberately wanted to do? Because when 2 of you started a company, it sounds very hard for me to think at that point that you were thinking, look, we got to build culture, because you came from Schlumberger, he's coming from Microsoft, you have no shared concept of culture. So how did this importance of culture come about for you and for Shashank and for Razorpay?
So when we read about Google, when we read about Apple and a lot of these companies, one thing that was very clear is that the company took the shape of what their culture was. And even though it was not very evident at the start, but if you look at what Google is today, or what Facebook is today, or what Apple is today, it's a reflection of what the culture that the founders set. If I were to pick up Sergey Brin and Larry Page and make them build any company, it would look like Google. Right? And I think, and that gave us a lot of focus that setting the right culture will decide how the company will look 10 years out or 15 years out or stuff like that. And I think because of that, we were very deliberate with our culture, that this is the kind of culture we want to have, and this is the kind of culture we don't want to have. And a lot of these are choices. There's no right and wrong, but just that we were clear that this is the right kind of culture that we would want. For example, one of the core tenets of our culture is transparency. That we focus a lot on creating a transparent environment where people inside the company have very clear view of what's happening and where we're going. And it comes out in various ways. Most of our discussion will happen on Slack public channels and not on private channels. We have a strong discouragement of DMs policy that don't do direct messages, use public channels as much as possible. Do something as simple as that there'll be no cabins in the office. So there are no cabins in the office. Or even more interesting, there are no curtains in the office. So if you look at Razorpay office, no room in Razorpay has frosting. All glasses are transparent and stuff like that. These are small things, but it adds up together to create the culture of transparency. And the reason we have transparency as a core focus value is that we believed that a lot of innovation happens from the ground. Innovation happens bottoms up. And that innovation cannot happen till you have information asymmetry. If people don't have visibility, if my sales guy doesn't have visibility in how my product is developed, he can't come up with an idea on, can we build a product this way and it will sell better, right? So information symmetry is important to have ground up innovation. And that is the reason we created a lot of focus on having a transparent culture. So that is one aspect of the culture. There are a lot more.
Sure.
But one of the things that we were very focused on is that we were very deliberate with our culture, and we still are. That if
is it codified? Is it codified?
It's codified, but codifying almost every company does codify culture. It does very little to actually propagate culture, right? So,
what in your words is the value that you and only you as CEO add to the company?
I think the biggest value I add to the company, it happens because of the side that I have from top is unblocking things. A lot of, as we grow larger and larger, a lot of things get stuck in the entanglement between functions and processes and structures. And the biggest value add I can do is just get into that and unblock it. And that unblocking can happen by bringing people on the same page, sometimes by changing the structures or changing the process because the process is becoming the bottleneck. Sometimes it will require a larger change in terms of, like, say, it requires a change of the strategy or org design to make it happen. But that's the biggest value I can add.
What are the 3 most common adjectives that your colleagues would use to describe you?
Hmm. I think impatient. I'm always in a hurry. And even people make fun of that I speak really fast. You probably would have noticed it because I'm always in slight bit of a hurry in getting through my point, in getting through things. The second thing is I don't know how would they put it, but I spend a lot of time going through the metrics, right? So like that is how they'll describe that.
Okay. Detail oriented?
Detail oriented, or like we're very metric focused.
All right.
Is that like you spend a lot
Numbers
of time,
focused.
numbers,
All right.
and talk a lot about numbers. And lastly, like a few people who would say this specifically that I talk a lot to people about how they feel, and this is something that said that it's very different. That when I'm doing a one-on-one or when I'm doing a chat, I spend like generally, especially with my leadership team, at least 5-7 minutes talking about how they feel, how are they feeling generally. This is something I learned from an investor, like this one investor in particular, Ribbit. Almost every investor, when they would talk, they will ask, how's the business doing? I had a first conversation with Mickey from Ribbit, and he asked me, how are you doing? And I started telling, okay, this is Razorpay is doing this. He said, no. I'm asking, how are you doing? And I think that's a habit I've really copied.
What's the best time or method to give you feedback?
Yeah. This is again a big challenge for a founder, that like typically you don't get to hear feedback. And this is something that, again, I've tried to incorporate a lot, that especially in my reviews and stuff, when I'm doing like say a month, like a quarterly review and a month or a half month review with my leadership, I would keep some time aside to ask them for feedback. And the challenge has been that initially when I would ask for feedback, people don't give feedback because they don't know how to give. Again, especially I don't know, it comes from Indian culture word. People don't think about giving feedback to your superior. Right? They don't even think in that lens. So when I would ask feedback, they'll say, this is not happening in this vertical, this is not happening in that vertical. I said, I'm asking for my feedback. Like, what can I do
It's the
differently?
same question about feelings. When
Yeah.
somebody asks you, how are you feeling? You start talking about how the company
How
is
the
doing, how
company is
the
doing.
projects are doing.
So when I would ask for feedback, people will start talking about things around that this is not happening well, but not about me in general. And it's not that they don't want to say, it's not they're afraid of it. They have not even thought in that dimension that, okay, that there's that I can also give feedback to. Like this is this godly feeling or authoritative feeling in India, and it comes from the way our school system works and stuff, that your superior is the right person and whatever he says and does is right, and you just have to follow. So there's no opportunity to ever give feedback back to your parents or your teachers, in some cases your bosses. So that becomes extremely hard. The way I try to drive it now is by asking setting specific time, and now because I've asked it so many times, people come prepared now that I'm going to ask this question, so what can they say? But otherwise, I think it's like any one-on-one setting is easy.
I'm going to ask you, is there something interesting that you can share with us that you've received as feedback from one of your, colleagues or direct reports in recent times?
A lot of these, like for example, my impatience. I've received a lot of feedback that, for example, when I do a one-on-one, a lot of times I'll be quick and finish it off in 20-30 minutes, even when we have an hour, and people feel unsatisfied by it, that you didn't give me at least an hour a week, right? Like we need that much time. So I've got that feedback a lot of times. I get easily distracted. I've got that feedback that sometimes I'm doing a one-on-one, the guy, we are talking, and it's not exciting enough for me, and I would take out my phone and start doing something, and I've got that feedback that you're very distracted in conversation. So a lot of things have come out like that.
All right.
The link to Harshil's full conversation, episode 6, is in the show notes. Next, we have Vineeta Singh, the co-founder and CEO of Sugar Cosmetics, one of the most popular and fastest growing cosmetics brands in India. Vineeta talks about overcoming stereotypes as a woman founder, the importance of passion when it comes to selecting your workplace, and why hustle, hunger, humor, and humility are key pillars of Sugar's culture. Let's listen to Vineeta.
Okay, so my dad's a biophysicist, and my mom was a scientist at ICMR. So they're both like PhD, like what Rachel would call the PhD who can't save your life on a plane, but the medical researchers. And I grew up in the AIMS campus, and I grew up with the aim to exactly do anything but be my dad. Because I was like, all these doctors, they work so hard, and I wanted something quick. Like I wanted to quick success. And so I decided, against my parents' wishes, I decided I'm going to become an engineer first, because options were just engineer, doctor. And while I was actually on my first trip to IIT, I was on a plane, reading my best friend's letter and crying, because my first time out of Delhi. And I, heard somebody say that I teach at IIT Madras in the row behind. And I was like, oh my God, somebody who was at IIT Madras. I swapped places with somebody, went and sat next to him. Turned out he was the head of the electrical engineering department then, which is where I was going. And it was supposed to be like a very scary department, because, it was very hard to even get like a average 7-point score. But I sat next to him, and then of course to start with, he started asking me like these really tough engineering questions, which I flunked. How does the tube light work, and difference between analog and digital and stuff
Why?
like that.
You already got in. Like,
No, he was,
it's
you
not
know
even
how
a classroom.
professors are.
Yeah.
You know how professors are, right? They feel so strongly about it that they just, love sort of pushing you to see what's in there. But anyway, so then he asked me, what do you want to be when you, after this, what do you want to do? So I told him at that time that I, chose engineering by elimination. I don't know if you've flown from Delhi to Chennai, but it's a 2-hour, 45 minutes
Yes,
flight.
yes.
So I think we went over a lot of stuff, and this was a few of them. But yeah, so he asked me this question, and I said, I want to be, what do you really want? I said, I guess, what will make you happy? I said, maybe being rich. And I remember at that time, he's like, I've met enough rich people. They're not the happiest. Consider maybe if you don't want to do engineering, consider maybe entrepreneurship. So I for the first time heard that word. And then I sort of like went to campus, and then I realized very quickly that in electrical engineering, I'm just going to barely make the cut. And I ended up with a 7.4, 7.5 CGPA, which was like really average. But I started reading a lot about entrepreneurs, and I started like devouring all these books, biographies of every single, from Howard Schultz, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and all of these books. And then it sort of in my head became like this, my parachute to get out of engineering, that this is where I can find something that I might be good at, because this I'm not good at. So very honestly, it wasn't a really, a decision which was out of that, okay, this is what I really want to do, but it was more out of this is not working, and this could be something interesting for me to try. So we actually started with a education, ed tech at that time thing, where we would like have we had a website called 10 a day, where every day you could have 10 questions to help you prepare for CAT, and you had to solve them online. And the idea was to expand it to every single competitive exam and try to get people to do assessment online and benchmark themselves. It was in 2007. Obviously, it was going to be dead. Then we pivoted that to background verification. So I ended up finally running for 5 years employee background verification company, where we would try using some tech to make the process more efficient. But we realized that companies weren't ready to pay a premium for it. So it became a commoditized business, and it didn't scale. And it was like this services business where you had to do like a lot of business development to get every single contract. And I hated it like to the core. And I always wanted to do a consumer business. And
how long were you at this first
5
startup?
years. And it was the toughest 5 years of my life. And so during campus, I proposed to my other 3 co-founders that let's start a women's lingerie brand called Caress. And I always wanted to do something for women consumers, and it was like this passion thing. So while we were on campus, we tried pitching to a few VCs, 10, 15 of them, and they said that it's impossible to try to build a brand without funding, and you guys don't have any experience in textiles, so I don't think you'll get funded. So before we graduated, we killed that idea. And then the day I got out of this company, I was like, okay, I am going to build a consumer business for women. And that's how Fabbag happened, because at that time it was impossible to think that we could come up with a brand. But we thought that if it's a subscription business, we might, firstly, be able to do something that's different from what everybody else is doing, because everything else seemed like commoditized. And secondly, we might be able to raise some money.
What makes you get up after you take a hard knock?
Oh, I still need to cry it out first. And it's, from like, and it's just, I feel that for women, it's just like a, self-expression. So I need to get over it first, like those 2-3 hours of crying it out. But then many times it's about, you remind yourself that this is not going to matter in 10 years. And this is something that I've learned from Kaushik, actually. Every time I'm like really upset about something, he'll be like, okay, is this going to matter in 10 years? If it's something that matters in 10 years, then I get myself to wake up next day thinking about how I can make another attempt at it, because, I definitely, the one thing I never ever do is like give up easily. So if it's going to matter in 10 years, I'll make another attempt. And if it's not going to matter in 10 years, I will just somehow find a way to focus on something else. And I feel that, whenever I've gone through really, really stressful situations in my life, I've resorted to exercise. I don't know. That's something that just helps me. Like, I remember when the COVID lockdown started, like, 1 or 2 days of realizing this is for real. And then the first thing I did was like decide, like, till this entire lockdown is over, I'm going to just, whatever happens, do and work out every single day. And I did that for about 120 days straight, because it was just so hard. But then I need to, sort of channelize my stress into something else. So generally when I'm, happy, I might slack in everything else, like, working out and reading. But in my most stressful phases of life, I will be like super disciplined, because that's the way where I channel all my energy and stress. Yeah.
Right. From an entrepreneur point of view, if you could go back through your entrepreneurial journey and maybe change one thing, is there something that you would change or do differently?
Many things. Like many things I would do differently. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of all the failures, right? Because you can only learn through them. You never learn through success. So I've had so many failures. I think the biggest I would change is I would build something I'm passionate about early on. I think my first business, I was bootstrapping and I was only optimizing for cash flow. And unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, if you were forced to optimize for cash flow very early on, although it builds great fiscal discipline, it sometimes takes away from that ability to build something which is really meaningful in the long run.
It just becomes a numbers business.
It just becomes a numbers business. And then you start doing too many things too early, and it just becomes like a, like a small boutique services business, and that's how most of us end up. So I feel that if I had the conviction to believe in myself and stay true to what I was passionate about right at the start, which was hard because I was also 23, so I always feel that was all part of the larger plan. I guess it's hard for a 23-year-old to have that kind of foresight, but I think because I have this thing I'm a marathoner, right? So I have this thing that I will not give up. I don't know when to check out. And that those 5 years were a bit too long for that learning to come through and get imbibed. I think I pushed it too much because I was like, I will not quit. I feel that like the only reason I've succeeded is because of grit. But then sometimes you never know when to, check out.
What do you feel you add most value to Sugar as CEO?
First, I think, is the consumer understanding. I speak to thousands of women in markets, through our D2C platform. We do a lot of consumer interaction calls. And I feel that it's very important, and it's the CEO's job to know the consumer well. So I think that's first. Second is, of course, just energy and optimism. I feel that that's really important to, because any business you're in, it doesn't matter whether it's cosmetics, there are going to be like every, good part is going to be followed with a hard part. And you need that one optimist to like keep everything together. So what I fundamentally believe is that's the most important job of a leader or a manager. is the coaching and the mentoring, because at the end of the day, it's, when somebody succeeds, it's on you, and somebody fails, it's on you as a leader or manager. And I am very passionate about doing that, but I realized that a lot of times, in startups, what happens is that young people do super well, and then they grow with the organization, and then they end up having large teams, but they've never really had the opportunity to grow this side, because at the end of the day, coaching, mentoring requires this love and patience, which is, very unconditional, right? And that's hard when you're like a 27-year-old manager running a team of like 20 people so now I feel more and more about it. We just got a chief people officer, and the biggest project that I want to drive with him is about formal coaching, mentorship, because I do feel that in my own journey. So a year ago, one of our investors called me up and said that, do you want a mentor? There's a mentorship program for women. It's called WinP mentorship program. And, they might help you find one. I had never formally had a mentor. And I just, instinctively trusted him and said, let's do it. And then they asked me, who do you want, etc., what kind of person, etc. And then they went over a process, and they came back saying that Vivek Gambhir, who's the CEO of Boat now and who is a Godrej consumer CEO, is okay to become your mentor. And I was like, yes. And over the last 12 months, I've had like just 4 or 5 conversations with him, but long 3-hour discussions. And it's opened up my own thinking to so many possibilities. And I realized from my own experience that, oh my God, if I don't give this opportunity to my team, then I'm really constraining them, because right now they're just constrained to whatever I know. And a lot of times they can not be as transparent with me as they can be with an external mentor. So because of both of these things, one, because I realized that senior leaders may not have the bandwidth or the ability to coach. And second, because of my own understanding of, even if somebody has the ability, they may not be able to, give an external perspective. I think that we want to introduce this formally now in the organization. Haven't really gotten around to doing it, but it's something that we're going to do.
What part of your job do you wish you didn't have to do? I think one part we got already, which was fundraising.
Definitely, number one. And second is agreements and lawyer conversations. And all. Very luckily for me, my co-founder just like loves all of that. I have not, I remember like on some, realizing once that there was a 2-hour long conversation around malified versus intended malified, and I realized that I am a very hyper impatient person. So for me, like, going over like documents which are like 20 pages and all of that is very hard. Like, what we've seen is that success is most closely associated with how much belief the person has. And it's, it doesn't matter whether you're joining at a CXO level or you're joining at an executive level. The ones who have flourished or enjoyed working here the most and have like stayed here over many, many years are the believers. The ones who believe in the idea of the fact that, there's a brand made by Indians for Indian women. Or excited about brand building, product, or just believe in the, trust us as founders, Kaushik and I. And what happened in the last 2-3 years is that suddenly there was this hype around startups, and a lot of like people who are doing well in their careers started thinking of this as a alternative career option. And I feel that, often that attracts the wrong kind of people, because if you're not a believer, when the party is over, when the lights are out and there is like, probably no increments possible, and you're going through
You're going to be the first ones to check out.
You're going to be the first ones to check out. So it's of course unfortunate for the entrepreneur, but forget us. For that employee, they will never be able to unlock that value that they thought they would create, because for that value, compounding has to play out. And for compounding, tenure matters. So you end up coming in and then you leave when, it gets tougher. You never create the wealth that you thought you could create in a startup, right? So I feel that it's like, double whammy. One is that like believers will not end up doing well. Non-believers will not end up doing well for themselves, and then non-believers don't end up doing well for us. So which is why we're very excited about the fact that we want to continue attracting those who are excited about the space, excited about building.
Which morning of the week do you look forward to the most?
Mornings are always Monday.
Why?
It's just, I'm there's always like over the weekend, things like something or the other keeps coming in your head that this is what I want to do, this is what I want to tell them. Like at any point I'll have like some 20 things which are like these projects, and I want to find somebody and be like, okay, can you drive this? Are you excited about this? And so on Monday, it's like this opportunity to get that all out. But sometimes, of course, Mondays get derailed because there's some firefighting, which I don't like. But, that's again part of.
If you want to queue up the full Vineeta episode, the link is in the show notes. Coming up next is Amrish Rao, the CEO of Pine Labs, the payment solutions provider whose point of sales terminals can be seen in most Indian shops and stores. In 2016, CitrusPay, an online payments provider Amrish co-founded, was acquired by rival PayU for $130 million in cash. It was one of the biggest acquisitions back then. But Amrish says it is also one of his biggest regrets. As a first-time founder, he made the decision to sell his company too quickly. As an entrepreneur, he says, at the end of the day, you need your own horse and your own carriage, and you need to be able to hug it every day and saying, this is mine. We talked about creating corporate cultures, to FU money, to risk-taking, to the evolution of fintech. Let's listen to Amrish.
See, I think, there is this whole concept around war times and peace times. And the way I say this is that in India, everything is wartime every day. Markets are changing, opportunities are getting bigger. You could find pots of gold lying anywhere and everywhere. What that means is you actually need to do a lot of debate and conversation within your team. Now, if you're in an environment, if you're in the business line which is forever at wartime, you want to meet people regularly, you want to have conversations with them, I think there is a need for everybody to be in office. Interestingly, there are different parts within your own organization who really don't need to be in that war room every day. For example, it just doesn't make sense to ask an engineer to, come from 2 hours away and come into office and code for 6 hours and then go back. They have my empathy, sympathy, which says that, look, why should you really come into office every day? But there are going to be product roles, sales role, finance roles, which you want them to be in that war room. You want them to be close to each other, build the bond. And those sets of people should be coming into office a lot more. Incidentally, what we are trying to drive out here is the top 100 within the organization should be meeting on a regular basis. Beyond the top 100, if they can be a little bit flexible in terms of being in office for, let's say, 2 days of the week, I think I'm personally fine with it. But just in my style of how I operate, I don't really try and do somebody else's job. And I really let the leadership in my organization decide how they want to run their organization. And they have the flexibility to do it.
How many years as an entrepreneur did you take to reach the point where you said you are not going to do somebody else's job for them?
That's a brilliant question, right? So I actually think that this is all about age. I'm sure you'll get to that point in your discussion. I'm 49 years. When I was, let's say, 35, 36, I was all about, there is one way of doing it. This is how we do it. Let's all march in the same direction. As you age, you start to realize that people are different. People's circumstances are different. Your thinking process is different. And hence there's an importance to letting them find their own style, evolve, and run organizations on their own. At the same time, you should not leave it to such a level where you start to feel that you're hands off when it comes to business. So generally, my mantra has been that when things are going good, do it your own way, do it your own style. Actually, you can actually ask me to buzz off if I come and ask you a question. But when things starts to tighten up, let's all get together and find a way to get out of that situation that we have ended up in. So, I would say over the last 2, 3 or 4 years, one of the things I've learned is, for example, how do you consolidate cultures? I'll give you an example. In Pine Labs today, we have Pine Labs, we have Quicksilver, we have now acquisitions like Setu and Mosambhi and a few others. Interestingly, all the cultures are completely different. And I'll tell you by geography, right? So there is a Pine Labs, which is a Noida-based organization. You have a Quicksilver and Setu, which is a Bangalore-based organization. And you have a Mosambhi, which is a Bombay-based organization. And their ethos, their cultures, their behaviors are completely different. For example,
At the risk of engaging in some amount of stereotyping, help us understand how are Mumbai cultures different from Bangalore cultures, different from Delhi NCR cultures?
again, so that I don't stereotype it, I'll talk about my organization. So,
Sure.
for example, we have an organization, Quicksilver, one of the largest prepaid businesses in the world. That organization, if you meet anybody from that company, you will say, such a nice, humble, sweet set of people. But what people don't realize is they are also one of the most aggressive set of, operators in that organization. So there's this unbelievable mix in the Bangalore organization that we have is very soft spoken, very, very humble, but aspirations and dreams are unlimited and very aggressive. And, if you're not listening to the conversation carefully, you might almost feel saying, oh, down to earth, might be low on
Chill.
ambitions, but they are super aggressive as a team out there. On the other hand, you have a Noida-based team from Pine Labs. There was a point in time where they used to only hire for mathematicians in Pine Labs there. And there, for example, hardcore Hindi speaking, generally a loud organization. And you would sometimes believe that, hey, this is like a over-the-top aggressive, institution which we have there. On the other hand, not at all aggressive. That organization was built on the fact that if you give me a nice code to build, if you give me a nice math problem to solve, I'll go into the deep of it and I'll solve the math problem. Again, if you're just sitting and listening to that, you'll feel, oh, it's such an aggressive behavior which is coming through. I've learned that people are completely different. You should not start with a position which says that, oh, understand, which geography, who comes in and where it is. Everybody has their own strength. And how do you bring all of that together into a single jar is something which I have learned over the last 3 years. Incidentally, when Citrus was acquired by Payu was a Gurgaon-based company. All of Citrus was based out of Bombay. Two completely different cultures there again. And then how do you pull that together is something which I have learned over these last 5 years,
It's the
3 years.
equivalent of a New York company acquiring a Silicon Valley
Absolutely.
based company.
Absolutely.
Right.
If you look at the number of consumers who have today come under the banking umbrella, within that, a subset of those who have actually adopted to digital payment transactions, within that, what is the frequency of their transaction? We are at an abyssally low number right now from a consumer adoption standpoint. Similarly, from a merchant adoption standpoint, in terms of how many merchants are today ready to take electronic payment transactions, it is extremely low. Now, obviously, what has happened between the demonetization days to today with UPI and with the whole QR code acceptance, still digital payments has gone to many, many areas. But we still believe that there's still covered only 10% of the opportunity where digital payments can go to. There is 90% market left where digital payments can yet go to. So as far as I'm concerned, all the fundraise that we have made in the last 2 years' time, it's really to go ahead and expand places or touch points where digital payments can go to, and then start influencing the consumer with right products so that they can make digital payments as a part of their life. And that's really where we've been going to. Now, there's another larger piece to ask is, where do we go next, right? Do we go global? Do we go into more areas just in India? I think those are the things that is still evolving in our thinking process. But the day I finished my 3 years, I was ready to run to do something different. Sequoia had funded us on the first round. I went to Sequoia to raise money. This was the days when Kunal had raised his round, Jiten has raised his round. I was ready to raise a decent round in those time and get going. And Shailendra, who's on the board of Sequoia, calls me up and says, hey, Amrish, there's another way to do it. And we spent hours together to understand what is the another way. But I think the simple thing what he told me is, He's saying, you're the dog who's chasing for something important. I'm going to give you the keys of the car. You drive that car. To be fair with him, he's lived up to his side of the deal till date. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm never going to call myself the founder of Pine Labs, but I'll always say that this is a company which I completely own and run. One of the things that I learned in the corporate world, which just completely killed me, if you ask me, was the whole corporate world is structured to be judged. Every action
and to be
of
risk averse.
and because you're going to get judged, you also end up becoming risk averse, right? So one of the things that I have done in each one of my startups is you should not have an environment where somebody is going to judge you. HR is not allowed to judge you. The legal folks are not allowed to judge you.
What does this mean? Because I'm very intrigued and this is very important. What does it, I know at a simple level, what you're saying makes sense. You should not be judged. But at an organizational level, what are either the cultural values or the processes that you put into place to make sure that that reflects that you are not judged?
Yeah.
Like, let's say someone decides to do something, take a bet, and it tanks. What does it mean at Pine Labs to say that person will not be judged?
That's a great example. And that's one of the things which I'm actually trying to say, right? That you make a decision and your decision tanks. You're not going to be under the pump for that piece. However, in a large organization of 4,200 people, the problem is somewhere else. People come in with that mindset which says, I don't want to make a decision. If you don't make a decision, I have to tell you, I'm going to go after you. You have to make a decision in your position and you might be successful or you might be unsuccessful. That doesn't matter. But if you don't make a decision, that is unacceptable.
Doing nothing is not an option.
Is not an option, right? And that, for example, is where we've drawn a very clear, hard line which says you cannot come into a situation and says, oh, the HR didn't give me the right answer. Or, the HR is going to ask the legal how that is going to all transpire. I wasn't sure how the CFO is going to handle it. These are not areas that you can get away with. You as a leader or you as a person have to make a decision, and it's something which I'm trying to push in a big way. That's important. The second thing which, again, coming from the corporate world is, what you don't want is you're not allowed to talk about a third person and the person is not in the room. Now,
Respect for the absent.
Absolutely. I'm just saying this figuratively, right?
We have that as well.
Because
do not say to anyone behind their backs if you can't say it to their face.
A few years back, when RBI came up with this OTP requirement on the end of every payment transaction, every e-commerce company in India went shouting to RBI saying, oh, you're going to screw the experience up. Our transactions are going to fall. I believe that this OTP coming in has single-handedly helped consumer adoption to digital payments, because the consumer is saying, my money is safe because of this OTP. My money is not going to go away. At the same time, when consumers used to just use a card, transactions used to happen. We know of instances where in Punjab and other locations where the consumer used to keep their debit cards in their safe deposit vaults. So no transactions were happening. So one piece was security, and that helped. Other is coming up with frictionless. Now, one of the reasons why UPI has worked very well is it's a very frictionless transaction. At the same time, because of this MPIN, the consumer feels very comfortable that my money is going to be safe. So when you have that sort of an environment, transactions will continue to increase. On the other hand, is when it comes to merchants. Merchants also realizing, saying, because of COVID, people don't want to touch cash. Because of this demonetization, people want to do electronic payments.
You said you've been in the payment space for roughly 25 years. You've been part of multiple companies. You've started your own, you're CEO of Pine Labs. What continues to drive and motivate you?
This is a fantastic question, right? So, I feel that there is a certain mission which I have landed on, and I feel that what I do makes a tiny impact every day. Again, I talk about it. When I started off, I used to sell ATMs. My first purchase order for an ATM was for 2 ATMs. I sold 2 ATMs in the country. We threw a party for that 2 ATMs deal. From that scenario to a scenario where we are deploying 35,000 POS terminals every month in the country, you look at it and said, I've played a small part. And every day I wake up in the morning and saying I'm playing a small part in that journey. So another piece which I want to clarify about me is I'm not into this for entrepreneurship or startup. I'm into this because I'm still continuing my lifelong journey of moving money from paper-based to digital. And that's what keeps me excited every day.
Have you ever thought about the concept of retiring?
I did. You know, this is what I was trying to tell you. The first time founder, made my money on my first exit. I thought I'm just going to chill. And I keep
How
talking.
long did it take you to come out of that? Was it months?
It was 1 year. It was 1 year which took me to realize saying, dude, I just can't do this. I literally can't do this where, I'm just sitting and, going for vacations and
You're 49 today.
Yeah.
Do you have like any kind of a age number in mind where you're like, after this age, I don't want to work?
I just don't have it. And you'll be surprised. While growing up, one of my friends, he told me the other day saying, Amrish, you were the only guy who used to talk that you want to retire at the age of 40, and dude, you've done so well. I it's just stuck in my head, right? No, what are these? Oh, hang on, I've got to tell you this one, right? So there's another close friend of mine in my college days, and then my wife also was in my college. And my wife is a Gujarati. And the two of us used to turn around and say, boss, life में कुछ नहीं चाहिए. 1 करोड़ का बैंक बैलेंस चाहिए. 1 करोड़ हम जाके स्टेट बैंक ऑफ इंडिया में रखने वाले. 10% इंटरेस्ट कमाएंगे. 10 लाख रुपए आएगा महीने का. जिंदगी में और कुछ भी नहीं करना है. My wife was a Gujarati. She used to look at me and she's saying, are you just mad? I kid you not. And I remember this very clearly. I used to look back at it and saying, Shweta, you don't get it. This is what life is all about. And as you grow and as you find your purpose and as you find your passion, you suddenly realize that there is something else that you want to live for.
Which brings me to the concept of FU money.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say this in a safe way, but I think users will, it's FYOU money, which means what's the amount of money you need to earn and have with you to walk away from whatever you're doing. Does it ever, 1 crore was at one point in time your FU money. Does that concept even make sense to you anymore?
Yes, this is the biggest problem for the first time founder. For the first time founder, what happens is first time founder is thinking of all these concepts, which says that, what
Build
is
to
FU
exit,
money?
FU money.
And the first time founder is also thinking about saying, agar itna ban gaya to hum bech denge, and all of those concepts come to the first time founder. When you are finished with that journey, you then start to understand saying that, hang on, there is something completely different. Now, of course, it's unfair for me to say it because we had a great exit. If there was not a great exit, maybe the second time founder, I would have made the same mistake also. So please don't get me that I know what I'm talking about. All which I'm saying is the second time round, all of these concepts just seem almost the real problem why you sold your company. So one of the things which has changed, if you ask me, in India today, the first time founders itself who are coming in, they are coming in with a completely different mindset. And I so appreciate their way of thinking and how they are building their businesses. Some of these concepts doesn't hit them. I can't say the same thing about founders who started off in 2012, 2013.
You've raised a lot of money over the years for Citrus Pay, and then subsequently, like you said, $1 billion over the last year or so at Pine Labs. What are your biggest learnings from all your unsuccessful attempts at raising money?
I think the biggest learning that I've had is you need to understand the stage of your own company and you need to understand the psyche of the investor. I'll give you one example. There was this large hedge fund kind of a... So incidentally, if you look at the Pine Labs cap table, I don't have hedge funds on my cap table. There was this one hedge fund who actually...
Reason being?
And I'll explain that
Okay.
reason, right? So the one hedge fund absolutely has a great relationship with me, always likes the story, has a very deep conversation, never invests into Pine Lab. And that person's take on it is he's saying, I have a thesis which says that if the company is not growing 100%, I will not invest into the company. And I'm like, dude, I can't grow at 100%. But if you see, I have an EBITDA positive position. Why wouldn't you want to invest? He's saying, this is not my thesis. So I then realized that how does an angel investor think? And it's completely different. How does a VC think? How does a private equity think? How does a hedge fund think? And then in Citrus Pay, we actually met Masayoshi Son. And this is the time when Citrus was this tiny fly, if you consider. And we had a chance to meet up with Masayoshi Son. We met up with Nikesh in those days. I went and met up with some of the hedge funds which were invested into HDFC Bank. Completely wrong. And we still made great presentations to them, came back discussing, saying, oh, this was a great meeting. No, you're never going to get money out of this situation.
All right. If you could go back in time and change one thing about any of your major decisions in your entrepreneurial career, what would that be?
I wouldn't have sold Citrus.
Why do you say that?
So again, people talk about it, well, Citrus could have been valued this or valued that. I wasn't, it has never bothered me on that topic. What bothered me till Pine Labs happened is, at the end of the day, you need your own horse, you need your own carriage, and you need to be able to hug it every day and saying, this is mine. When I sold Citrus, I lost that. And that made me so uncomfortable. It's not funny. Now, when I look at what I'm doing with Pine Labs, I really believe I have been able to get that all over again. And that's why I'm completely satisfied with where I am. But that's one decision in my entrepreneurial career which I will regret forever.
What is it that you feel you add most value to Pine Labs as its CEO? If it were one thing which you had to abstract it out to.
I think as the one thing which I add to the company, I feel is this sense of speed and velocity. I think, my job is to drive velocity and speed within the company. Obviously, drive a lot more focus, but that's an obvious thing. But the fact of driving velocity is extremely, extremely important, especially in an organization which has got multiple businesses, 4,200 people. The sense of urgency and driving velocity is something which I feel is my number one role. Now, very close to that is, this whole culture and what you build in the company is important. I'll give you one example. When we sold Citrus, our office boy made 50 lakhs when we sold Citrus. Yesterday, I was in the office out here. I was working late. The boy who was giving me chai, I had a 20 minutes conversation with him in terms of how much do you earn? Where have you come from? Where do you stay? I wish everybody does that with everybody in the company. The simple principle is, if I'm in the position to lead a company, anybody who comes in that company has to be happy when they are there or have to have learned something new in that period of time. If I can drive that culture in the organization, I think I'll be very satisfied with my role.
What are some of the stock responses people may hear from you if they come to you saying, I have this problem, can you solve it for me? What are you most likely to say?
I don't come to you to solve for my problem. Why are you coming to me for me to solve your problem?
The link to episode 8 with Amrish is in the show notes. Which brings me to Amit Agarwal, the co-founder and CEO of NoBroker, the 9-year-old Bengaluru headquartered real estate platform that wants to disrupt the very concept of brokerage fees. Amit speaks about entering management consulting as a young MBA because it paid the most, starting a business that almost no investor wanted to fund, convincing notoriously value-minded Indians to pay a subscription fee before finding a rental apartment, and running a frugal organization with a cockroach mentality. Let's hear Amit.
In fact, coming back to the statement that you made, which we write that we are the world's largest non-brokerage company. So what happened is that when we were raising funds, we used to say that we want to disrupt the brokerage market and we want to make a C2C platform. And the question which was most asked to us by the investors was, that where is the US equivalent of this, or where is the China equivalent of this? And our answer was, we don't know. There is no other equivalent of us anywhere else in the world. And their question was, if there is no Uber, no Amazon equivalent of this anywhere in the world, then how can this be a great idea? Somebody somewhere must have figured out that you can disrupt brokerage. And how is it so that you think you can and everybody else has missed? And our response was that perhaps in other countries, law and order and rules are stricter. You need to give exam to become a real estate broker. You need to have a certification. Here a grocery shop guy also can become a broker part-time. And also that in terms of paying income tax and being regulatorily bound by what you promise, those things are different in US. So our journey basically started by questioning, and as your show basically says, first principle. So I think we started with a very, very first principle, that why can't people talk to each other directly? And the response of VCs were that yes, they can, but if they could, why hasn't this been done anywhere before? And second objection was what you basically just said, that since a broker is physically present, they can take the money post the deal is done. What we said is, we are not a broker, so we are going to charge a very small amount, 1/4 of this, and it's going to be flat fees. So we don't care how expensive the house is, we are going to charge a flat fees. So their question was, this sounds fine, but why will a customer pay in advance when the deal is not done? Because this is not how real estate happens anywhere in the world. You go to any country, customer never pays in advance for real estate deals. And that also without a promise. So after I'm Ahmedabad, like it typically happens that whichever thing is paying most, that becomes the favorite profession for most of the MBA grads. So management consulting was considered to be the hot industry and something which is challenging. So I took to management consulting just because of that, not because I knew anything about it. Once I entered management consulting, I realized that it's extremely challenging. And typically people leave in 2 to 3 years, because you need to fly Monday morning. And for that flight, you need to get up at 3:30 because you want to reach at the office by 9 in the client location. And when you're coming back, it is always the last flight, which always gets delayed. Last flight of the night always gets delayed. And then you reach you reach early morning of Saturday. Somehow for me, I love the challenge which comes at the client side, because typically what the client would say is that you are going to see my watch and tell me the time, right? That typically is what people think about management consulting. So I love that challenge of basically people doubting whether you are with good intention, and then slowly you working hard, really adding value. And then those same people start trusting you. And when you leave, then they are good friends, and then you remain in touch with them. So I loved management consulting. I loved the challenge of it, the thrill of it, the difficulty of it, and the intellectual challenge of it. So I'll just give you one additional point of data which will help us together decide. The additional point of data is that in these MBA colleges, you look at what happens after 1 year. More than 50% of people
Attrition.
change jobs.
That's right.
So and these same companies who are acting so pricey to take only 3 people from that campus, they are going to hire people of much less caliber in hordes outside campus, because that's what the need is. On that day, in that campus, their HR told, okay, 3 people. So they came up with that artificial less quota, but they are large companies or they are growing companies. So if I can go back and if I can go to every campus and tell the kid who is basically worrying about the day 0 and slogging in the night and is feeling very nervous and is wearing tie for the first time in those 2 years, I'll tell him, don't worry. This is not the end of life. At that point of time, it seems like the end of life. If you don't get into day 0, you are gone. And there is this peer pressure, and there is this also sort of shame that you did not get into
That's
the
right.
good
Like,
one.
if you haven't gotten placed on day 0 and
Yeah.
day 1, and then every additional day just adds to the pressure.
Correct. But the data doesn't agree with it. The data says that the same companies hire you much more easily later after you have 1 or 2 years experience outside the campus. Data says that anyway you are going to change the job. So if I could go back, I will say that focus more practically I'm saying focus more on making friendships, because these same guys, your friends, are going to give your resume as a referral. That is much more better ROI on your time than worrying about that particular day job.
What is it that you feel you add most value to NoBroker as its CEO?
I think the team is extremely good. They are very, very driven. The only thing which I think I challenge them is make it larger. Why can't we make it larger? So I think sometimes because of the experience that they have had in past, they must have worked in some other company where the mistakes must have been punished. So many a times I feel that despite all good intentions, they don't take a large bet. And I think that's the one thing which I basically encourage them and coax them to take a larger bet. Even if something goes wrong, we'll figure it out. I think there are two principles perhaps. One is that we have always assumed that if we could make the slate clean, how would we start? For example, there was no concept of a phone relationship manager ever in real estate industry. We said, hey, let's assume that there is not a single broker who can take you and put you on the back of his scooter and show you houses. We are starting afresh. Now, how would you connect to people? And what information that person would need? For example, a tenant, I'm digressing a little bit. For example, a tenant is often deluded into believing that this property is very hot when it is not, right? So the broker, once he guesses that you are interested in this property, often says, hey, the token is you have to give the token by tonight. Otherwise, there are 5 more people. And second principle is basically look at the inputs first and output later. So instead of asking the sales team as to how much sales has happened, look at the inputs more, saying that are the owners increased? Have the owners increased? Have the interactions increased? Are you basically seeing any dip in any core input metric? So then the discussion becomes less about, hey, you have not done a good job, to what has not helped you do a good job. So I will tell you that in terms of culture, we are a tad different, say, from other startups, and every startup reflects the approach of the founder, and all the approaches are good. For example, many founders love micromanaging, and when I meet them, they tell me that we love micromanaging because that's how it should be, or that's how we like, and they are great founders and they have made great companies. So that approach also works. My approach is to basically delegate fully and trust fully and create more entrepreneurs in NoBroker. Because after a year of starting in NoBroker, I realized earlier I used to think that I am very smart. I'm from IT, I'm from IIM, and this business is basically 2 + 2 = 4, so I can figure it out. But I think after 1 year, I realized that if you have people who are smarter than you and who are driven and who have been given full accountability, then they just become 10 more co-founders. And that has been the amazing discovery. So I don't think that before I became entrepreneur, I ever imagined it. So now, coming to your question, now when I meet people, I'm trying to, so we have a saying, always be a owner, never a tenant. Basically means always have an ownership mentality. So what I have realized is that people either have that mentality or not. And people who have that mentality has a feature in which they try to pursue something in their life without any specific great advantage. I will just explain you. So what we have discovered is people who like sports, who have played sports a lot. Not that because they'll come to Indian cricket team, but they just love pursuing it. People who have pursued music. Last year, everybody was investing everywhere. The number of deals were sky high. Where are those good companies? This year, there are even better companies who are surviving in the environment, but nobody wants to touch because others are not touching. So it is a herd mentality. And we went to South Korea, some unknown investor, some single guy in Japan, HNI. So for the first 5 years, we just survived. And then when, of course, the network effect starts hitting, then General Atlantic, entire global came. So my learning from this is that, hey, you can't fight it. You just need to survive. So we think that we are like a cockroach company. We just want to survive. And while we had 18 crore when we raised, whenever me, Akhil and Saurabh, whenever we used to travel overseas, we will always stay in one room with extra bed in which Akhil had to sleep. And we, in our HSR office, which we took, even in that 1 or 2 month of summer which is there, we never took AC. While we had money, because we were so much paranoid that nobody is funding us. So what will happen to us? And I think that frugal mentality still continues. So any problem and the frugal mentality quickly kicks in because, yeah. So this is amazing question. And the way in which we deal with is pure maths. So what we basically say is, we are seeding these new businesses. You are doing packers and movers. You are doing furniture rental. Now we said each of you are an entrepreneur. We are giving you some seed funding. So we are giving you some resources. You can hire some people. And then we are giving you access to our NoBroker customers platform, one page. And then you are on your own. You figure it out. And once you start giving some traction, once you start converting some traction, then we give you Series A funding. So then the technology team will come. They will say, okay, I'm going to make a page for you.
So
I'm going to
the
do some feature.
corporate is like the internal VC and new initiatives are like startups.
Exactly.
Are there startups that you have refused to fund at some point internally? Saying
No.
that, look, your numbers are not great. We'll think about it maybe later.
The way in which we have done is that, yes, we have said that, okay, we will not fund you. But always it has happened is that because when we started that startup, we knew that the pain point is there. It belongs to one of those marketplaces where the customer NPS is wrong. And hence, what we have said in our investor entrepreneur ways, that this startup is not bad. This entrepreneur is not good. So what we do is we have I say the exact same thing which you just mentioned. I say, I am an investor. So when suppose a guy comes to me with a problem, I say, hey, you are the entrepreneur. You need to figure it out. You tell me the answer how it can be done. And if he's not able to do it, then we are convinced that the market is big, the startup potential is big. The guy is not right. So then we bring a new guy and we say, okay, you give it a try.
Which are the kind of people who typically don't fit into NoBroker?
So there are two types of people. One is people who come for good salary, for startup glamour, but they want a lot of directions. So they have come here saying that, hey, yes, I am the owner. They have been able to...
Are these middle management, senior management,
both,
junior?
I am talking about senior management only. That at senior level, many times people come
I
and
got it. This is the last 3, 4, 5 years when there was this wave of senior talent that came into Indian well-funded startups because there's stocks, salaries, etc., which a lot of which is reversing. Right?
Exactly. So these people come, they enjoy the initial aha moment, and then they realize that they need direction. They can't think, or they don't enjoy the process of thinking and experimenting and so on, which we figure out within few months, and then we part ways. Second is a very unique set of people which I never imagined before would come. I would put them in as extremely intelligent people who are so intelligent that when you interview them or when you talk to them, they can come up with very articulate 10 reasons why this will not work.
I get it. It's at the intersection of intellectual and cynical.
Yes. So you are absolutely right. Most of these people are extremely cynical and skeptical. And so I remember interviewing a guy and he told me in extreme detail why the business for which I am hiring him will not work. And I looked at him and said,
it makes no sense because you got to believe. I mean, the job of an entrepreneur or even a leader in a startup is to believe against all odds.
So I told him in the interview that you are absolutely right. If you think it cannot work under you.
What are some of the stock responses people may hear from you if they come to you with a problem that actually they should be solving, but they've come to you? I mean, like, what might you say commonly?
My most common response is, you are the entrepreneur. You tell me what needs to be done. So I think the 2-3 failures is one, I would say, experimentation which failed was that we tried with the co-living experiment, and we basically took the houses and which are shared accommodation of bachelors. And then we discovered that it's a hospitality business because the bachelor keep on leaving the houses. So their attrition is extremely high. And unless you have a minimum set of bachelors living in a house, the owner doesn't make money. And then you need to buy the furniture. So it is extremely logistics driven. So when we did the calculation later, we figured out there is no way you can ever make money. So it is not about 1 year or 5 years. You can never be profitable. That's what we figured. We felt. So we basically closed that.
What phrases are you known for inside the organization?
So 2-3 phases. One is always be a owner, which basically means always have an entrepreneurial attitude. Second is honesty first, nicety later. Because I have seen many people being nice in cross-functional meetings and not speaking their mind out of respect. And third is that when you are a leader, you are like that glittering goldfish in an aquarium, which everybody is looking at. You are not looking at everybody, but everybody is looking at you. So as a leader, be extremely cautious with what signal you send, what you say through your body language. Never be flippant. If you want to give a message, but never underestimate the fact that 30 people are looking at you and their observation power is much, much more than your observation power.
Do you find it easy to change your mind about beliefs, strong beliefs that you hold? And if so, how?
So in fact, I think that I do it now so often that I need to course correct. So I'm always on the lookout of new piece of information and data so that I always keep my mind fluid about what the decision is. Because in this business and like every other business, customers change, their priorities change, and you need to be extremely nimble. Competition is tough across the categories that we do. They are amazing entrepreneurs anyway. And we have seen that the reason why we are thriving is exactly because our predecessors felt that non-brokerage would not work. So while we started, while we got funding, while we created an office, while we were getting customers, every month, every year, they could see that data. But still, they decided in their mind that no, non-brokerage is not a thing to go. Similarly, I am paranoid that have I decided something which is too strong? So hence, if the same thing would happen with us if we are too inflexible.
If you want to listen to all of Amit's insights, head over to episode 9, also linked in the show notes. And finally, we have Tarun Mehta, the co-founder and CEO of Ather Energy, easily India's best-known electric scooter maker. Tarun speaks about his journey to convince investors of his vision, doing hard things that defied common sense, building an organization over decades, and why it takes at least 3 years to make a true impact at work. Let's listen to Tarun.
When we began, we ultimately wanted to build an energy company. We still do. We still hope in the next 30, 40 years that we build this, hopefully we build this, we are able to shape this more towards an energy company. The mission of the company that we written for ourselves was dropping the cost of energy. We had an idea of battery packs. So we figured building battery packs, enabling electric vehicles sort of fits in with the idea of an energy company. And actually the first product that I had proposed had 3 buzzwords: simple, safe, sasta, right? It was not the 450 that you know today. It was supposed to be a 25 kilometer per hour scooter that'll ride very slowly, will only carry 1 person on it. Because I figured that might give us a good shot at building large number of electric vehicles. As we kept diving in more and more, and that's my rationalization also, right? Eventually you also have to find a way to crack into the market. If you're going to be going up against the likes of a Bajaj, TVS, Hero, building that product was not going to be good enough. We wouldn't have been able to convince enough people to buy this. We wouldn't have been able to convince enough people that we are a legitimate brand. We wouldn't have been able to convince, we wouldn't have driven enough passion or excitement for what we're doing. We kind of realized, listen, the right way to crack into this market would be to cause a lot of desire. People have to fall in love with what we're building. If you don't do that, people are not out there to try and save the environment. Nobody cares about carbon emissions truly. It's all a post-purchase rationalization. How do I convince people that buying electric would be a good idea? Yeah, we're increasingly moving towards that. We've experimented with it, by the way. It's not like we didn't think of it. What we realized is that if you build a very powerful brand, you're better off making all your money upfront with the customer, right? Because that's where they're willing to pay you all that you ask them to. Don't try to cut corners there. Don't try to push monetization later. We increasingly become confident that, you know what, maybe even something like charging, like access to public chargers. Don't ask them to pay you on a per charge basis. It's peanuts, it's distraction, it's just a pointless effort and friction for everybody. Give them
Instead-
lifetime free access to charging. Just charge them one-time package for it. Turns out that's the best way to make money. It's the lowest amount of commerce, least friction commerce. You just collect everything up front. And if you have the right product, you can solve it with financing. Yeah, sure, you can do those layering, right? But I'm becoming less and less of a fan of complex monetization exercises. You do imagine reading a lot of McKinsey articles that the monetization model is changing until you actually start selling stuff. What happened for us is when we began in 2018, when we began sales, we had a model at 1.25 lakhs. And we had announced then that we'll have a monthly subscription for a whole bunch of stuff. But what we realized is most people signed up for those subscriptions at the point of sale of the vehicle itself. And increasingly we saw them sort of say, can I sign up for like a 3-year subscription here, 5-year subscription here? You would have imagined the other way around, right? Like, it's okay, just sign me up for like a 30-day pack. I'll experiment more. By the way, there are 2 parts. This is part 1. So what I realized is if people trust the brand enough, they just don't want to get distracted by again and again getting called up, again and again making that decision. They would just want to sign up for that for a long time. They just want to trust and go for a long time. You're buying a 1.5 lakh rupee product. Do you really want to decide every month whether you want to spend another 300 rupees on it? You would rather just say, you know what, charge me 1.53 lakhs. Take the next 1 year. Heck, charge me 1.6 lakhs. Take the next 3 years, right? I'm signing up for the entire experience here. Don't cut too many of those experiences out and make it very complex for me. It's not 100% true, but it's more true than not. That's what we realized. The second factor, however, and that was our own conscious call. We realized there are a lot of things that we want to offer people, but they don't know that they need them today. Okay. And the more I make it an optional thing for them, like, hey, pay for it as you go, unlock the value of it as you go, they will actually not unlock it. Let me give an example. It's a slightly related example. A lot of customers keep asking us. We were the first ones to introduce 3G SIM card on a scooter. So it's 4G. Sorry, back then it was I think 2G, whatever. I'm a Marwadi from Jodhpur, but born and brought up in Ahmedabad. Went to school there. Joined IIT Madras in Chennai. Did a 5-year undergrad there. My dad runs a small business, but that's like 1-person business, so it's not exactly like a big business. Family's fairly split. Some folks are in businesses, lots of them are in services. So there was no natural, despite being a Marwadi born in Gujarat, no natural reason to sort of go for a business. I'm very clear. I went to IIT because I was hoping they'll give me a 6 lakh rupee job back then. I just wanted a good job, right? I tried ultra hard to become a consultant. I ensured that my resume was really well dressed up to get
Which
into
year
McKinsey.
did you pass out?
2012.
All right.
I tried ultra hard to become a consultant. Really
Why?
tried hard. Because that'll just pay me more dollars. Like good money is made by consultants or bankers, and I didn't think I would enjoy a bank. Consulting seemed sexy enough. But I couldn't clear a single consulting interview. Tried really hard to get into Harvard. Harvard HBS 2+2 program, but failed that. So was basically down to other options. Got into Ashok Leyland, which just gave me a lot of free time. Left Ashok Leyland 6 months later and started this up. The more customers we spoke to, the more we realized that, listen, nobody will pay us a single rupee for this battery pack. Because what we are trying to do is, people have bought electric scooters. We'll go to them and we'll tell them your batteries suck. We'll give you, instead of a lead acid battery, we'll give you a brand new lithium-ion battery that will last you better, ye, wo, balana, tikra. And realize, listen, they hate their scooters. They're not going to spend a single dime more on fixing them. It's a terrible business model. If you want to build this, if you love our batteries and our battery management systems, the only way forward is to actually build the entire vehicle and sell them the vehicle. So we built a few scooters, and we drank enough of Kool-Aid to think that if you could build an ugly-ass prototype in a college, we could totally build a production scooter out there with funding. So we said, yeah, we'll start a company. And everybody encouraged us, which was a bad idea because our predictions were terribly off. It goes back to the start, why we ended up starting Ather. We wanted to build an energy company. We just landed up on batteries, and that took us to vehicles. Now, what we wanted to do was just build a lot of electric vehicles because that has a meaningful impact in the energy space. But how do you build a lot of EVs? How do you sell a lot of EVs? And as we went through our options, we kind of realized that, yeah, you could do like an ultra cheap vehicle and try and sell it, but you will just end up commoditizing your cells, not create enough value, not create enough trust, and in the process possibly cause a lot of mess. And that's what kind of happened in China. You could take an approach of go ultra heavy on marketing, right, of a fairly mediocre product. But then you're just going to run into essentially a marketing battle with companies that are way better than you on this, right? Like a Bajaj will beat you left, right, and center if you try to do that. You could try and just discount again an average product and sell that, but then you're on a discounting war with larger funded startups, and there will always be better funded startup than you. And that's a terrible thing. Like if I want to do this for the next 30, 40 years. I don't want to put the fate of this entire thing down to who fundraises better. That's a terrible, I don't like the control that it gives me. So what's a best strategy to control and actually put out a lot of vehicles? We realize that, you know what, turns out in the scooter space, not a lot of people are trying to build a good product. With the exception of the original Honda Activa, I have very little respect for great products. There have just not been enough great products in this space. Activa was the last great product. So we figured that, listen, of all the options that we could start a company as, if we take a stab at recreating and building an amazing, successful product, we'll win on a few, we'll win on parameters that others are not competing on. I don't want to compete on stuff that others are already good at. It's a losing battle. I don't want to win a manufacturing battle with a Hero. I don't want to win a marketing battle with a Bajaj. I don't want to win the trust battle today with a Honda or a TVS. These are super hard fights. I don't want to win a funding battle with an Ola Electric. I think these are fundamentally lost causes. You'll feel you're fighting a good fight until you just lose last.
Would you invest if you went to raise money from yourself with the pitch that you had?
Actually, I would definitely say this guy sounds fraud because my numbers kept changing. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. Like this should really have gotten shot down properly, because I used to tell people that, listen, 10 crores, 25 people will move a vehicle to production, right? And I legit believed in it until I was disproved and I raised 80 crores and I still couldn't figure out how to move this to production. We're now with 100 people. And I figured, okay, this is it. With 100 crores and 80 people, 100 people will move this to production.
Famous last words.
And then we raised 200 crores and we're still struggling. It ended up costing us 400 or 500 crores to finally move this to production with a team of 300, 400 people. I was terribly wrong on my estimates. So investors were all right when they told me that your estimates are wrong. This will take much longer than you're thinking, much more people than you're thinking, much more money than you're thinking. What all of us were wrong, however, was on the opportunity. We all thought this is an opportunity. We all now think this is a much larger opportunity. But they were right in saying that, yeah, my estimates are wrong, my numbers are wrong. No, so we learned a lot of painful lessons in drinking our own Kool-Aid and going down a very long path sometimes. The company almost died 5 times. 5 times in Ather's life, we have legit run out of money. By run out of money, I mean, not like, wow, short runway. I mean, as of this day, we have no money in the bank. We can't make our dues tomorrow. It's happened so many times that we've learned some lessons out of them. We still believe that you've got to make long-term deep bets, but we've become very respectful of the fact that you've got to make very few bets. You cannot do everything. And the way we now sort of institutionalize that is by insisting on a very, very, very sharp product portfolio. People keep asking us, when will you guys build a bike? When will you guys build more scooters? When will you guys possibly build a car? I used to say, yeah, maybe in a few years. Now I say, no, we'll not. We're not building a car. We're not even going to touch a bike for another 2, maybe 3 years. We may touch another scooter next year. And this is after the fact that Ather runs the largest R&D in India today. The entire R&D is just focused on one thing, because I know that everything that we do, we often end up doing so deep, I can't have the system sort of getting confused. It's unfortunate, but it's a function of how our economy evolved. Building requires a higher risk taking, and just higher. You've got to have some room for failure. But given how poor we were as a country for such a long time now, building was not really an option. what the only way people could earn was by trading something that works, and trading margins hence became the only way to sort of make money. Even if you look at most auto companies or most companies in India, almost all of them will eventually trace their origins back to some trading. Oh, we were importers of this, we were importers of that. Even auto companies, hey, listen, we had a joint venture with this European company, this Japanese company. They bought the tech, they bought the product. Obviously, everybody wants to buy their product. So we gave them land and we started running operations for them. As scale grew, we had to set up multiple plants. So they taught us how to build plants. So the next plant we built. As scale grew, we said, listen, we will just start running the plant ourselves. You don't need to run the plant. As scale grew, at some point we kicked them out and we said, you know what, now we are the brand and we don't need you because technology is anyway stable. But the fundamental DNA that, listen, like unlike, let's say, General Motors or Chrysler or Mercedes-Benz, which can legit claim like we invented the internal combustion engine, there is still a DNA somewhere in that organization that, yeah, we can build from scratch. We may have the wrong culture, but the building culture is not completely disappeared. I think a lot of companies in India don't have that culture. And I think it's a shame. And it is, by the way, it's not just engineering building. I think just legit the fear of building anything new is just very large in Indian companies. I write that in that blog at some point that notice how many companies actually tried building a brand in India and how many companies try to build a brand in US. And I think it's a very good parameter to check how many companies are willing to build. Because if you're not willing to build a brand, you know you're a trading company. Your brand has no value. You're a trading company. You will import something, you will export something, and you're done. You'll sort of quickly make a 10% cut and you're out tomorrow. It's when you decide to build a brand that you're thinking long term. And I think that's where the entire builder mindset starts. I'm thinking long term. I'm putting a promise out. What I'm saying has to mean something. You could still be you could still be a trading company of sorts. But I think most builder companies have to start by thinking of building a brand. And very few companies in India attempt to build a brand historically. We had the more classical functional org structure until we hit this magical number of 300. I was advised once upon a time that good organizations also break around the 300 mark for some reason, which happened to Ather. And everything sort of started falling apart. Same time, we concluded that we are doing too many things. We're running out of money. And everybody's sort of saying the same thing. Wow, this is not the Ather of old, so on and forth. And we kept digging in and we kept trying to fix this. Ultimately, we realized that one big problem is people can't context switch enough. If people managers have to switch across 5 different products, and by the way, charging is a different product, vehicle is a different product, our connectivity is a different product. If the same sourcing guy has to understand the context of every single product that you're building, every single component that you're building, there's too much context switching happening for that person every day. And everything is centrally going through him. So we iterated enough and we finally got here. But it's still WIP. We've been building this structure since early 2020. So we launched our first product here in Bangalore, right? And all the early adopters were product managers at tech companies, right? Or that profile. And you think that that's what your market is. Actually, for us, it was a happy surprise and allowed us to change strategy for the better. But originally, looking at our audience, especially because our first store was here in Indiranagar, you're going to think that, wow, this is your typical buyer, right? Somebody with a lot of spare cash and just wants to have the latest in technology. And we started calling this in our profiles that it's a tech early adopter that we are selling to.
So there was a feedback loop. The people you saw and the people you sold to ended up becoming your target audience as well, more and more.
And you sort of feel that, oh, we should probably solve their problems of, even more cutting edge stuff that's probably meaningless and pointless, but seems cool. At least there was this debate internally. Until we got to Chennai, and I think more importantly, until we opened up a second outlet in Bangalore in JP Nagar. JP Nagar is not where all the techies are necessarily coming from. And JP Nagar certainly started attracting a very different audience. Family buyers from JP Nagar and Jayanagar. Proper families coming in and all of them making a very hardcore decision. Listen, I'm going to be riding this scooter every day. Does this work for me or not? It did work for them, which we lucked out. But it certainly changed our understanding of who the customer is. And the early adopter crowd sort of disappeared after a while. Very quickly, actually, after the first maybe 5,000 units. So we started thinking differently about product marketing. We started thinking differently about what we are really selling here. Bangalore does have a way of sort of otherwise changing, keeping you in a little bit of a bubble. A lot of people start up because they want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be, free. They want to make a lot of wealth. apart from my base cash requirements, that was never the real requirement. We were never driven by, wow, we want to be free, because we don't think starting up is becoming free. It was not about, I want to own so much percentage. You get massively diluted as an entrepreneur in India. So very frankly, if what happened is at some point we could have done this in another company, but we could have done this, what we wanted to do, it wouldn't have mattered whether it's our company or not, frankly, so much. And we started from there. We didn't find a place where we could be housed. So we decided to start up. We realized that it wouldn't make sense to get acquired after a while. So we said, holy shit, screw it. We'll just build our own manufacturing, our own supply chain. We'll just do it ourselves. We'll not just do design. And so now we're here. But to date, we are still not driven, because we are interested in building an organization because we think that's the only way we can ensure what we have started sort of continues. Not because we want to run this for 40 years necessarily. I'm hoping I get to do this for 30, 40 years more. Okay.
You said you've had 5 near-death experiences.
Correct.
So my question normally is, what are the top 3 failures that you've had? But like, let's go with still that. Like, if you had to look back at Ather and you were to look at things that you did, either missteps or missed opportunities, are there anything that you count as failures?
Contrary to what I told you at the start, we were not very focused, especially in 2019. And that's why we learned. We were very defocused. We were trying to build a scooter, a bike, this and that and everything. And let's just spread the organization too thin, too early, without having first productionized and profitably sold this thing. And that came very close to killing the company. And that just started a bunch of sequence of events. It took us 2 years and several near-death experiences to sort of get out of that crap that we walked in 2019.
That downward spiral from there.
Yeah, down.
Or was it what were the successes? Because you came to a near-death experience because you spread yourself too thin.
Correct.
What's more interesting, you're saying that wasn't the end of it. It took you 2 years to kind of recover fully from it. What happened? What was that?
See, because by that point, you can't just sort of jump out of that trajectory so fast. The challenge is you've already walked in a place where, listen, this product, by the time we realized, towards the end of 2019, we realized that, wow, we can't do this. We have to focus. And we cut out every single thing in the company except the scooter. Every other thing became just dropped off the priority list, like priority 0. This was the only number 1 priority. But this is a negative gross margin product. It is a minus 200% negative gross margin. I can't fix it tomorrow, right? And if I can't fix it tomorrow and we have no money, that means I can't sell anything tomorrow. So until this unit economics is fixed, we can't sell anything. So now you're stuck in that place, and you're going to be in that place for a solid year before you really fix this unit economics. And then you will have to face the reality that you've not industrialized this product really well. So you've got to focus a lot more on supply chain. But to get suppliers' interest, you need to be able to tell them that I will produce a lot of this tomorrow, which you can't say until that year is done. So you've got to go through the really painful year, fix the unit economics, then go with an honest face to suppliers, tell them, now I will buy not 200, but 500 units a month. And I'm projecting I'll get to 1,000 in the next 3 months, right? Trust me, they will not trust you. So you have to live through that painful quarter, demonstrate before they start listening to you. So this entire phase took a solid 2 years. And the end result of these 2 years was that towards the end of 2021, we finally signed the first outside term sheet from a financial investor since December 2016, right? So you couldn't just sort of snap out of it very quickly. I changed my mind a lot on short-term things. I change my mind very rarely on long-term things. And that's something we also expect generally at Ather. Have extremely high conviction on long-term bets because we can't go wrong there. Because we have long-term bets, we also double down so massively on. There will be a 300-member team working on it. So you can't get the long-term bet really wrong. Really have high conviction on it. Short-term, be super flexy about. We think this spec was a good idea. You know what? No, competition's launched. We learned that's a terrible idea. We can still switch out of it. So short-term, super flexible. Long-term, very rarely.
To listen to the full conversation with Tarun, head over to episode 10 in the show notes. And that was all for this special episode. A big thanks to my colleague Rajiv CN, a resident sound engineer, for helping put together this special episode across over 8 hours of conversations. I hope I managed to interest you in at least a few of these incredible conversations, if not all of them. And I hope to see you with a brand new episode next fortnight. Thank you for listening.